So I upload my video Berserk, Griffith Did Everything Wrong, and it kind of sat there for a little bit. It got some views, not a lot, until about late October, early November when it started spiking up in views. I'd estimate the reason for this is that Berserk is expected to go off of hiatus, so there's naturally more people searching up Berserk in the wintertime than there would normally be. The reason I bring this up is because 1 week ago I got a very particular comment that got me thinking about a different topic that is unrelated to what this person brought up. It's a little bit condescending, but I kind of wanted to bring it up here. So this comment is from Electrouser5, and it says, "You don't understand the story well enough to get why Griffith did nothing wrong. Simple children read Berserk and fall into the obvious trap of thinking Guts is the hero good guy and Griffith is the mean bad guy." It goes on, but it's kind of not relevant here. First off, it's very clear that you didn't watch the entire video, and that's not just me saying that, it's also proven by analytics that on average people didn't watch the entire video. But at the end, I bring up that the God Hand is controlling Griffith, and Griffith is a part of the God Hand, so what Griffith is doing at this point in the story is probably for some nefarious purpose that the God Hand has set up. You know, just like everything else that's happened after the Golden Age arc. But whatever, that's not my point here. He brought up that I assumed that Guts is the hero good guy, which I don't think is true, only in the sense of how Guts and Griffith relate to each other. Guts is definitely the victim in this situation. That brought up the interesting idea of Guts' morality, you know, how he feels, how he thinks, you know, where he stands on a moral spectrum. And I think it's interesting because with Griffith, the reason why he's so contentious as a moral figure is because he fits into two opposing ideas of morality. He fits into like a shining icon and a nefarious villain, and it's really hard to reconcile those two because we don't think of them as being the same thing. He is white and black at the same time. Guts, on the other hand, is much more of a moral gray area. It's not that he embodies any one extreme moral system. It's more that he is in the middle, and it's up to us to determine whether or not we're on his side. First off, I'm going to bring up the fact that from a narrative perspective, Guts is the protagonist. The main conflict of the story is Griffith did a bunch of bad stuff, and Guts needs revenge. That does not necessarily mean that Guts has to go about it in a healthy way at all. Guts puts lots of people's lives in danger in pursuit of his goals of killing apostles. In the very first volume, he puts an entire village in danger just to draw out one apostle that he can kill. Throughout a lot of the early part of Berserk, before we get into the Golden Age arc, we see a lot of examples of Guts putting everyone in danger just to get at one person. In the Fairy Child arc, this is brought to a head because it kind of looks like Guts is killing a bunch of children, which, I mean, it's ambiguous whether or not that's what he's doing or if the children had already kind of died before he killed them and they were just reverting to their dead bodies. It's ambiguous, but it's very clear that he doesn't really take this as a moral concern necessarily, or if he does, it's not going to impede his progress in what he's doing. Guts, in the early part of Berserk, really has no qualms about anything, and in D&D terms, you could almost call him chaotic evil, or chaotic neutral if you want to give him the benefit of the doubt. He's mean, he's nasty, just all kinds of terrible things. But as the story goes on and we see Guts getting more friends and companions, we start to see his views change a little bit, and we start to see more positive aspects appear in his personality. But at the same time, we see negative aspects of his personality surfacing more and more over time. We see the Beast of Darkness, which is a manifestation of his own rage and beastliness. And that comes out sometimes in often horrific ways. In one of the most notable Well, you have the Berserker armor, but in one of the most notable non-combat examples, we have him violating Casca the same way Griffith did. It really brings into question whether or not we should sympathize with Guts or empathize with him. Ultimately, though, there is a fundamental difference between Guts and Griffith, that being that we can follow Guts's opinions and what he feels and how he thinks, and we can see that these conflicting parts of himself do cause him strain. They do cause him distress. He does not want to be this way, and there are inherent contradictions in the way that he thinks that bother him. The Beast of Darkness is ultimately something that he is afraid of, a part of himself that he can't control. Griffith, on the other hand, does not seem to be very concerned about his actions. He views himself from a perspective where everything he does is inherently right by virtue of the fact that he was capable of doing it. That was his passion, and therefore he should be entitled to whatever he can possibly do. And that's why we don't really hate Griffith during the Golden Age arc until the very end, because even though he's killing a lot of people, we are perceiving it from the perspective of him achieving his goals, and it's only when he starts targeting people that we really like that we start to perceive it in a more negative light. In the same way, Guts initially is going after people that we don't have a lot of context for and we can't consider evil or good, and in the process he gets a lot of people killed that are innocent. So we would perceive him as being kind of a bad guy, or at least a neutral character. But as the story goes on, he starts to build up attachments and grow with people. He starts to develop with people, and we see attachments forming. And in that way, we sympathize with him, and we want to see him grow more. Griffith doesn't grow. He doesn't even really change. His personality stays relatively the same throughout the story, even though his personality is inherently enigmatic. The biggest change to his personality was when he literally became a demon. To what extent are we supposed to say he's really changed? Maybe it's just that all these personality traits he has as Femto existed when he was Griffith, but he didn't have the same amount. But like, an extreme amount of demonic power allows him to better express who he is without fear of consequence. My point here is that while Griffith and Guts are both morally in a gray area in terms of what we should or should not feel about them, and a lot of it is left up to interpretation, ultimately, the way the narrative is structured, we are made to feel that Guts is the character that can grow and develop and change, and part of that development is getting revenge for the transgressions that were brought against him. In that sense, we are better able to sympathize with Guts. And with Griffith, who is so enigmatic and so seemingly unwilling to accept that anything he did was wrong, it really puts us off of his personality. Note that this doesn't mean that I am going against anything that I said in the previous video. Griffith is still in the wrong. Griffith's actions in the Golden Age arc were fundamentally wrong, and he should not have done them. And based on the way the story is going right now, it seems like he's a wolf in sheep's clothing, and possibly the Antichrist. Guts, on the other hand, I'm hoping will have a full redemption arc, though the way the story's going right now, it looks like the other characters might begin to realize some of the darker stuff that Guts has gotten up to, and maybe we'll have a part of the story where Guts has to reconcile what he's done in the past, and everyone has to come to terms with that, and he will be confronted with it, which I think will be really interesting, and it'll be fascinating to see what path he takes in that. This video was a little bit shorter just because I didn't really need to go into every single detail of what happened to Guts over the course of the story. It's not as important to determine where Guts stands on a moral line, because really, he's not a moral character. You can't think about Guts in those terms. He's a motivated character, less so in the Golden Age arc, but more so when he actually has a goal, kill Griffith. But the story is less a tale of good and evil and more a character study of Guts and how he comes to term with grief. Mostly through anger, as we find out. But actually, that might be a topic I could go into at some point. Guts' response to grief and how Berserk centers itself around that. I mean, all the major moments in Guts' life that we examine during the story are moments that cause him extreme grief. Like all the moments in his childhood that led up to the way he is now. And then the story that we're going through is just him dealing with all of that and slowly getting over stuff, but sometimes stuff flows back in and he starts feeling things all over again. It gets really complicated after a time. And I think on some level, the moral arguments that people have about whether or not Griffith did anything wrong or whether or not Guts did anything wrong, it really defeats the point because ultimately it's a character study. And the world of Berserk is not exactly an ethical one. I don't know how valuable talking about ethics really is in the context of Berserk, especially since I feel that they might not go into it as much as people assume that they will. This is just me speculating, but I mean, there you go. Anyway, this video is wrapped up. That's pretty much all I wanted to say. So, if you like the video, like, comment, and subscribe, and give me some of those cool comments. Let me know how you feel about this video. The reception to the last video was pretty positive, and I want to know if this one goes over the same. So, I will see you later. Later on. In life and all its treasures.